Thank you very much. Let me make sure I get this because let me try to summarize my presentation in case you need to go to the bathroom. You can just listen to the summary and come back and miss all the beautiful graphs I'm going to show you. In summary, our air is currently unhealthy, and the rail spur will simply make it worse. And so let me walk you through some of the data. And if you love graphs and charts, you're going to love this presentation. Current air quality. In 2013, we here on the Mesa violated the state's health standards, okay, for particulate matter. And I'm going to focus, the EIR focuses on many air pollutants, and Marty went through some of them. I'm going to focus only on two aspects of the air pollution problem. The fine particles, because that's our main problem here on the Mesa right now, and toxics, the things that cause cancer, okay? Those two areas I'm going to focus on. First, let me focus briefly on fine particles. The state and federal government both have set health standards for fine particles. I'll talk about the health effects. They're there, but let me tell you how many times we violate those health standards every year here on the Mesa. Last year, at the fire station down on Route 1, we violated the state's health standard 97 times, okay? The monitoring site just outside our gate, or just if you go to Via Concha and Route 1 and turn left, we call it Mesa 2, we violated the health standard 59 times. So it's worse up at the fire station. We get plenty of it down here. Guess how many times it was violated in LA? You might think more, right? 26 times versus 97 times here, all right? In SLO, nice town, only once. So we are, without question, I hate to say this, we are the most polluted part of this county, by far. And worse than LA in regard to this pollutant. Now, we also violate the federal standard. We have violated it for the last 3 years. It's set at a higher number than the state standard is. And we have violated the federal standard just last year for the first time for the very fine particulate, the particulate 2.5. And I'll get into these size matters. But you can see here the health effects are serious from this pollutant. Because of its small size, it gets very deep in our lungs, can get into our blood vessels, can cause inflammation of the lung, blood vessels, the heart, okay? The kinds of effects are serious. Irrigation of the airways, reduced lung function, aggravated asthma, chronic bronchitis, irregular heartbeat, non-fatal heart attacks, and some cancers. This last part is what I'm going to ask for a show of hands. The research shows that the effect of PM fall mainly to people with pre-existing heart disease, pre-existing lung disease, children, or the elderly. How many here meet one of those criteria? Okay, I thought so. I'm sure many of you meet two of those criteria. Now, this is the graph I love the most, and it is unbelievably difficult to read. The hours of the day run across the bottom. So there are 24 hours in the day. There are 24 hours that run across the bottom. This axis is measures both it's an axis that represents both wind direction, which is very important here. Keep that in mind. And also the level of the standard. The California standard is, sorry my hand shakes so much, about 50 micrograms, exactly 50. The federal standard is 150, okay? The red line is wind speed. All right, so at about 10 in the morning, and the blue line is the air pollution, measured every minute. And this is a day which violates the state standard, does not violate the federal standard, but is not one of our really bad days, all right? So at about 10 in the morning, and most of us are up by then, and the wind speed comes up a little bit. It exceeds 10 miles an hour. The wind direction turns to 300 degrees at that time of the day. And it's very important. 300 degrees means the wind is coming right over the refinery, okay? It turns out that our worst days are those days when the wind is coming over the refinery. Not because the refinery is there, okay? But that is the wind, the direction. And with very modest wind speeds of 10 to 15 miles an hour, we can get peak exposures of, remember that the health standard is set at 50. We can get concentrations at 350 during our waking hours when I'm dragging a cart around the golf course. So we have a unique problem here. Our pollution is a daytime pollution issue, and it comes in, with regard to the rail spur, it comes from winds that are coming over the refinery. So think about introducing new diesel engines into the refinery space on days of our worst air pollution. That's what we're talking about here, okay? And I'll talk a little bit more about diesel exhaust, because it's primarily, the primary air pollution problem is from diesel engines when it comes to the rail spur. Next slide. Some people think the problem is sand, right? There's a grain of sand, 90 microns. We are talking about particles that are either 10 microns or less, or 2.5 microns or less. A human hair, as you can see, is anywhere from 50 to 70 microns. So we are talking about particles, and the reason they can go so deep into your lung is because they are not sand. These are superfine particles that actually behave like a gas. They're so fine, all right? And those are the ones that get deep in your lung or deep in, and actually cause the irritation to your blood vessels and eventually irritate the heart as well. Next slide. I'm about to move to air toxics as the other pollutant of concern. EPA has just announced that it's revising, or at least looking at revising, its standards for how refineries operate in terms of the efficiency of their flares, okay? I took this picture myself, and you can see that our flare is not operating all that efficiently. That is the refinery flare, okay, if you will. So we are also exposed at this point in time to toxic emissions. This happens to be a potential source, but the main source, could you go to the next slide? The main source is the crystalline silica, which is the main component of the very fine particles we face, or that are the main source of our fine particles that exceed the health standards. Crystalline silica is a known carcinogen. So we have, currently today, we have a toxic exposure, and I took these words straight out of the EIR. So this is a quote from the EIR. We are exposed to high levels of toxics. So we have a fine particle standard problem. We have an air quality toxics problem. And that is basically the baseline that we have today without the introduction of this rail spur. Next slide. Now, the rail spur is really all about, for the most part, in terms of health effects, it's really all about introducing diesel engines into this space. Diesel locomotives, diesel trucks that will come to haul away the additional coke, the additional sulfur, et cetera. And this is a quote I took from the California EPA's Office of Environment Health Hazard Assessment. And as you can see, it says that diesel exhaust poses the highest cancer risk of any toxic air contaminated evaluated by that organization. So the rail spur, for the most part, is going to be introducing, unfortunately, high-emitting diesel locomotives, additional truck traffic, diesel engine fired, additional equipment on site, much of it diesel powered, in a zone where when the wind comes across it, and if you remember back to that graph, I said, remember the wind angle is very important. That wind angle on those bad days runs parallel to the track that Phillips 66 is proposing to build. So it's literally an exact parallel line, 300 degrees from if north is 360. Those peak exposures happen on those days when the wind blows straight over that refinery and right down that rail spur and heads, unfortunately, right this way. Next slide. Now, let me turn briefly to the EIR and what it says. The thing about CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, is that it's there to see what the impacts of the project are. And it classifies those impacts in 4 different categories: Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, Class 4. Class 1 is the one you work on, okay? Class 1 is significant impacts that cannot be mitigated, all right? So they're going to be impacts, and they really can't do anything about it. Now, in large part, they can't do anything about this problem because of federal preemption. The county cannot tell the railroads what kind of locomotives to put on those tracks and to bring to SLO County, okay? So if the railroads put on whatever locomotives they want, there's nothing the county can do about it. So it can't mitigate the problem. So and I'm gonna go through those areas that were found to be Class 1. Class 2 is a concern. It's a significant impact, but generally in the DEIR will find that there are things you can do to mitigate it. One question you should ask yourself is, do you believe they will actually carry out that mitigation? There's one of my favorites is when they actually construct that site, the amount of earth moved, et cetera, and the amount of diesel equipment, et cetera, used out there will be really large. I mean, that's a lot of land, a lot of dirt's going to be moved. There's going to be a lot of dust in the air. They found that to be a class 2 significant but mitigatable. There are 4 full pages, 4 pages full of all the mitigation activities that refinery would have to put in place to claim that this is a Class 2, not a Class 1 activity. I frankly don't believe it, okay? There is no way that there's an agency that will enforce those 4 pages of activities. But anyway, that did. There are many, however, that did classify as Class 1s, and I'm going to turn to those next. Next. So there are 5 areas that were classified as Class 1 impacts in the air pollution area. I've tried to highlight in red what they are. Number 2, the operational activities associated with the spur at the refinery for criteria pollutant emissions. Criteria pollutants to you guys, think of it as the smog. It's also fine particles. It could be carbon monoxide. There are a number of criteria pollutants. The ones I focus on primarily are fine particles and toxics, but one of the major impacts is on ground level ozone, or smog. Those of you from LA are probably very familiar with. The other class 1 impact was operational activities along the main line. One of the really interesting things about this project is that it is going to create air pollution along the entire length of the rail spur, of the mainline tracks. So cities up in up in the Bay Area, or in Davis, or in Sacramento, or all along this main line, are going to be realizing significant, unavoidable impacts for criteria air pollutants. Not just here, it is not just a local issue. Number 4, at the refinery, operational activities will generate toxic emissions. And again, this is primarily because of diesel exhaust. As if you remember what it said, it's the most toxic of all air pollutants. Air quality number 5, operational activities along the main line of toxic air pollutants. Again, because it's diesel exhaust, people living near those tracks will be exposed to unavoidable high levels of air toxics. And then lastly, the county has a greenhouse gas plan. The state has a greenhouse gas plan. The DEIR found that the operational activities associated with the spur, again, it's primarily the trains coming down the tracks, will generate greenhouse gas emissions that exceed thresholds. So it'll add to the greenhouse gas problem. Now, this is a really significant number of serious Class 1 impacts from a single project. I would think any one of these Class 1 impacts would be enough to kill this project. But 5 of the 11, and there were 11 total Class 1 impacts found in this DEIR, were related to air pollution. And all of these particular impacts are, in my mind, very significant. I can end there, but let me show you one graphic of the cancer risk. We're right here right now. This is the cancer risk if preemption, and there's no reason to think preemption will not work. There's every evidence that suggests that the county is preempted from doing anything about these diesel locomotives coming down the track. But if preemption, if there is no mitigation because of preemption, this is the increase in cancer risk. These are the areas in red will exceed the threshold cancer risk increase that SLO County considers to be hazardous. And you can see it covers a very large area. Even if you believed that the mainline trains could be mitigated, all of the housing along Willow will, because of the increased diesel truck traffic, will experience increased levels of cancer risk. Again, because it's not just diesel locomotives, it's diesel trucks as well. But this is the more likely scenario of no mitigation because of preemption, and the increased cancer risk, it seems to me, is clearly unacceptable. Thank you very much.